everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Articulating Priorities for Collections for our mentees, where we'll discuss the basic elements of and practices in, building collections. My name is Kelli Morgan. I'm the Winston and Carolyn Lowe Curatorial Fellow here at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, which is a lot to say, so also known as PAFA. And I'll be your moderator today. And joining me are my esteemed PAFA colleagues, Anna Marley, who is the Curator of Historic American Art, and Jodi Throckmorton, the Curator of Contemporary Art. Two highly respected voices in the field that you can find out much more about in the program posting for the webinar on the AAMC website. AAMC is the only professional membership organization that offers professional development, leadership skills, and direct connections for art curators working in the not-for-profit sector. We're a diverse organization, so we encourage voices from all across the world. We encourage both museum curators and independent curators to apply for membership. So if you have friends that are working independently, please encourage them to join the organization. As a student, coming out of graduate school, I can't even tell you, how important and key, the help from the institution has been to me as a young curator. The webinars offer discussions on essential skills, the latest discoveries in the field. They really define the profession of an art curator to enhance the understanding and the development of the field. So to watch previous webinars and to find more detailed information on AAMC as a whole, please visit the website at www.artcurators.org. So without further delay, this afternoon we'll dive into our topic, and I will step back now and let Anna and Jodi begin our discussion. What I'm thinking in terms of how this will be structured today is that both panelists will present for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll spend another 15 minutes maybe talking collectively in terms of a question answer about relevant topics. If you have questions during that time, feel free to type it in the chat box, and we can either answer them, as we go, or we can wait to the end, depending on just the feel of the flow of the conversation. And then, I'll leave a little bit of time at the end as well for just questions from the mentees. So without further ado, Anna, I'll turn things over to you.
All right, thank you, Kelli. I really want to look at Kelli, but I'm looking instead to this big brother-like camera above me. So hi everyone, it's nice to meet you. I'm thrilled to be a part of this, and I'm thrilled to be able to give back to AAMC. I've been a member for, I think, about 8 years now, and I've always really learned a lot from the conferences. This is the first webinar I've been a part of, so that's really exciting. Hopefully it won't be my last. I'm going to be involved in AAMC in their new program for international mentorship, and I am mentoring a curator from Brazil this year. So I am looking forward to working on a webinar for that as well. But today, Kelli wants us to talk about collecting plans. Luckily, I have lots of experience with this. I started at PAFA about 8 years ago. March 1st, it'll be 8 years. And I came here straight out of graduate school. And definitely one of my weaknesses was not knowing the market and not really having bought art. So to work with our museum director/directors and the other curators to create a collecting plan was a continuous learning experience. And we're always working on it and tweaking it, and trying to do what's best for the institution. So Kelli wanted me to answer what a collection plan is and why it's important. I think why it's important is because when you're at a museum, you have to have some really specific ideas about what you want to collect, what you want to prioritize, and why. Because otherwise you'll just get overwhelmed and go in all these different directions and not be able to say no when you need to. I find as a curator you do a lot more saying no than saying yes. And so it's really important to think strategically about the strength of your institution and what strengths you want to build on, and also your weaknesses in your collection and how you want to develop those, and if you can develop those. And that's a fundamental tension, I think, that we've struggled with over the years, building on strengths versus trying to fill in gaps or weaknesses. And there can be a lot of philosophical differences as you build your collecting plan about that. And hopefully you balance a little bit of both. So as to what a collecting plan is, it can be very specific, and perhaps Jodi will talk a little bit more about that when she speaks. I've only developed a collecting plan for PAFA. Jodi has worked on them for other institutions as well. So it can be very specific, like a list of these 10 or 20 or 30 artists that you want. Or it can be more general. And in the case of PAFA, what we did was the historic curator, myself, our modern curator, and our contemporary curator all worked on our separate sections, and then we worked on bringing them together, and then our director worked on them, and then we presented them to our collections committee chair, and he had suggestions, and then we went back and worked on it, and then our collections committee read it and had suggestions, and we made revisions, and then we sent it to the board. Now, this is a working and living document. Since I've been here, I've had 2 different directors. We had one curator of modern art who's no longer here, and I've worked with 2 curators of contemporary art. We're about to have another director. And I was just looking over our collecting plan, and it really bears the stamp of our longtime curator of modern art in some great ways, but there might be ways that the new curator of modern art wouldn't agree with all of those priorities. But the thing is, we all worked together with our collections committee and our museum director to structure those priorities. So they didn't come out of left field. And I can't tell you how important it is to have those things when you are in New York and you're shopping and you're meeting with dealers, and then you have somebody call you with an offer of a Thomas Eakins from their attic. To have the guidelines of a collections committee stamped document that you as curators have developed with your director to emphasize what is important about your collecting priorities, what this institution needs. And I think our document right now, we based on the next 5 years. Like, these are our collecting priorities for the next 5 years, and this is what we need to do. So in terms of my collecting area, the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, as some of you may or may not know, was founded in 1805, and we've been collecting American art since then. So I would say we have one of the top 5 collections of American historic art in the country, or perhaps the world. So our collection ranges from art made by Charles Willson Peale to art made yesterday. And one of the great things about this collection is how strong it is. In my area particularly, which is 18th century to early 20th century, but it also makes it exceedingly hard to shop for. When you have Winslow Homer's The Fox Hunt and Gilbert Stuart's Portrait of George Washington and Violet Oakley's Stained Glass Windows, to fill in the gaps in the collection can be very challenging. But there are gaps. And so we have to be strategic about what things we can fill in. There are 3 areas that I have worked hard on over the 8 years that I've been here. They are works by African American artists from the 19th century, women artists from the 19th and early 20th century, and Hudson River landscape painting. Three fairly different groups of types of art, spanning the period from the 1830s to the 1920s is what I've collected in mostly. The Hudson River School painting has been fascinating because to get a fox hunt quality Hudson River School painting would require an outlay of perhaps $30 million. So we don't have $30 million. So how was I to develop a collecting plan around Hudson River School painting with the money we had? It was very challenging and it took a long time. But I feel like we were successful in the strategic decisions we made. One of the challenges that we consistently face with our collections committee, and Jodi could probably talk more about this, is quality. A lot of the PAFA board members will say, but is it PAFA quality? And so one of the ways I was able to do this with Hudson River School painting is I bought a beautiful Albert Bierstadt 1869 work of Niagara Falls, but it was paper laid down on canvas, so it wasn't a canvas painting, it wasn't a western scene, it wasn't Yosemite National Park, and it wasn't on a huge scale, but it was from a period where Bierstadt was doing these stunning sketches, fully finished sketches on paper. And so it had a freshness and a beauty, but of a smaller scale that we could afford, but also of an iconic subject matter. So, and it happened to be in a private collection in Philadelphia that I had known about for a long time, and it opened up. So you have to be patient, I find, with our collecting plan, but I knew that we had this big gap in Hudson River School painting. And basically in my area, it was things we missed out on in the 19th century. For some reason, even though we exhibited Lily Martin Spencer, we never bought a work of hers in the 1860s. And that was one of the first works I bought when I came to PAFA. Although we've been exhibiting and showing the work of African American artists and women artists since pretty much the beginning of our establishment, we didn't always collect those artists. So, for example, even though Bannister won prizes for his landscape paintings at the Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia, we didn't have a Bannister. And I tried multiple times to get one at auction and failed, and then finally I found one with a dealer in New York that was of a very high quality and fit within our budget. And yeah, so those are, I don't want to go too far into this, and I want to make sure that I've talked about these areas, but I know that Kelli wanted me to talk about addressing gaps and how we've been filling them. And you know, I get offered a lot of beautiful paintings by people all the time, and I always sort of try to go back to our collecting plan and say, you know, is it worth taking something else off the wall to buy this work of art? And does it fit into this plan that we've outlined where I need to catch up with things that we didn't get in the 19th century or the early 20th century? And so that is how the collecting plan has helped me in my work here at PAFA.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. I think that was really in depth, and like I said, in the question and answer period, you know, we can go back more into some specific examples, you know, if you want to come back. Jodi, you ready?
Yes. I just want to say that those things that we didn't get in the 19th century are the things that keep me up at night as a contemporary curator, because I keep thinking in 100 years what what will I have missed and what will that curator be saying about me? But so as Anna mentioned, I've been at PAFA now for 2 years. So I've had the benefit of doing this collecting plan process at an institution in California and now at PAFA. And this all feels very fresh to me because I would say within the last year, I've been going through a rather intensive collecting planning process with our new contemporary subcommittee. And that is a new thing for us. We had always had just one large committee of about 25 to 30 people. That's about the range, right, Anna? Pretty much, okay. And about a year ago, we decided to also break up into advisory committees. So there is a historic, there will be a modern when we have a curator of modern art, and then there's a contemporary subcommittee. So all those committees are working groups for the larger committee, and we've been working really hard to work out that structure and how to put the committee to work in a way that's productive for us all. And my job at PAFA in contemporary is what I like to say super contemporary, uber contemporary, because it's limited to the last 20 years. So in my purchasing, I go back to 1997 at this point, which I would say for most institutions is very contemporary. I am the lucky beneficiary of a robust acquisition fund, which was not the case at the other institution I was working at. So that's very exciting. So the collecting plan that I have been working on is really focused mainly on purchases. And so as soon as we had our director left, and that created a vacuum of sorts in the contemporary area. And I had a meeting with my new subcommittee, and I quickly realized that if I didn't show them that I very clearly had a plan and a vision for this collection, it was going to go all over the place. I would be getting suggestions, which I don't mind at all from the committee, but I may be railroaded into purchases that I may not think are best for the museum. So after one meeting where we had some exciting surprises, I will say, I decided to go back and take off and add in detail from the plan that Anna, our former curator of modern art, and I had been working on as a whole, to really get in depth with the contemporary plan, to show them that I do indeed have a vision for the museum, and I have a proposal for how we should move forward with collecting. And one of the things that Anna addressed a little bit, but I want to say again, is that we are a pretty small staff, and that's the beauty with 3 curators and now luckily a curatorial fellow. We do have the benefit of really working together very closely within the different disciplines. So the 3 of us, as we were thinking of the plan, always had the idea that we wanted this to be a plan with threads that trace all the way back from Anna all the way through to work being made today. And so we very much created our plan around those ideas. And I tried to think about that as I was continuing with the collecting plan. And as Anna mentioned, there's always the question of, do you focus on gaps in the collection or do you focus on strength? The difference between Anna's collection of historic work at PAFA and mine in the contemporary realm is that I would say that we have a great deal of work to do in the contemporary area. We have some incredible pieces and some incredible foundation to work off of, but we're not really at a point where we can say that we are ready to fill gaps in the contemporary area. So I looked at those places where I thought that we could really build on. One of those exciting areas for me, and one, frankly, a draw for the job for me, was that we received about 5 years ago a really important gift from a collector named Linda Lee Alter, and she collected only art by women, and she gave her entire collection to PAFA. So that was an exciting starting off point for me, knowing that we can build off of that into the 21st century even more. We can look at LGBTQ artists and think about what they're doing and how that thread runs through Lee's collection as well. And we can trace that back to what Anna's doing with her work. So it was very exciting for me to take off of that. And that was very much in my mind, as well as, again, the Academy's strength in art by African Americans. So I was really thinking about how to increase that diversity in the collection. And of course, build a collection that, Anna mentioned the word quality, that is often brought up at different meetings, but is of the highest quality. So as I was talking to the committee, even, I would say that from the day I started here, I was in research mode for this type of collecting plan. Actually, even before I started, right? When you do an interview, you look at the collection and think about how you would build it, certainly. So, the research phase was all about the collection, thinking about those areas of strength, but also something that I think I realized at my past institution and has really come up here a lot, is in that research phase thinking about the maybe not so sexy parts of collecting, the storage issues, which we are very fortunate. We just built a brand new works on paper storage, which is increasing our storage by at least 80%. But our painting and sculpture storage is very crammed right now. So, for example, I'm trying to bring in a painting that is 10 feet wide, and I'm coming up with a lot of discussion about where that painting will be stored if it's not on view. So thinking about that, thinking about the budget, thinking about your audience, which I think plays an important role in the collection, though maybe we think about it more with exhibitions, and also thinking about your committee and the strengths that they have and how they can help you reach out to other collectors, reach out to galleries, what is their knowledge base that they can provide, that they can help with. And then the other part that played a large role in other institutions that I've worked at, and to some extent here, is thinking about the larger strategic plan for the institution. I tried, as I was working on my collecting plan, to really tie it back to the larger goals of both the museum and the school at PAFA, because the students are a really important audience for us, and we do try to think about them as we're collecting things. So after my, I would say, surprise meeting where I quickly realized I needed to get in control of my committee, I went back and did a rather intensive few months of thinking about strategies and goals, and started to really formulate my collecting areas. So I presented a plan to the committee with these strategies and goals, and I'll just give you a few, just so you have a few examples of things that I said. So we want to build an American art collection of the highest quality and with the greatest potential for student and community engagement that, and then there's 5 different points, some which include represent significant developments in contemporary art, of course, embraces gender, geographic, and ethnic diversity, puts the work of pivotal Philadelphia artists in context with work by major national artists, and also one of the things that the curators often thought about, but I think became a bit of a contentious point with the committee, is that we have incredible museums in Philadelphia, including the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which has an incredible collection. And it's really important to the curators that we think about how we can be different from that collection, and how actually maybe we can together provide for a really interesting range of collecting experience in Philadelphia. But that surprised me that became a point of contention in a lot of our discussions with the committee. And then I developed also a list of strategies, focus on these 4 collecting areas, focus on purchasing works within the last 20 years and look for donations in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, which fits within my limitations, of course, with my purchasing power. And the other thing that I put in my strategy, which I'm really excited about, and it's one of the most fun parts of my job, is commissioning. We've been doing a lot of commissions at the museum, and I wanted to weave that into the collecting plan as well, because I think it's really exciting to be able to give artists money to make the work. And I think that oftentimes the museums get really special pieces when you support that work. And the pieces that we've done have been quite successful so far, and we recently voted on another big commission, so I think the committee's really pleased with the work that we're doing in that area. The following meeting, because this in 2-hour meetings, that's a lot to cover. in the fall, and I really tried my best at that time not to present too many acquisitions. It didn't happen across the board because some donations need to come through, but I really tried to step back on my purchasing at that time. So at the following meeting, I presented 4 thematic collecting areas, 3 of which build on strengths, tracing all the way back from the historic, and 1 which I think is more of an expansion for us. So looking at new media and things like that. And so my presentation to them was again, I made sure every thematic group that I presented, I showed, and this was all in consultation with Anna, so we help each other figure out what goes together exactly. So I would present a piece from the 19th century, then I would present a piece from 1930, and then I would present a piece that's in the collection right now that's contemporary. And after that, an example of 5 artists and what we might collect that goes in that area. The other part of this that I was really pleasantly surprised by with my committee is that I knew that I needed to think about assessment. I think it's a really difficult thing for most museums. It's something that I think we're all struggling with a bit. Some people do it really well. But how do you think about assessment with a collection, especially when, in 100 years we may not know whether something has lasting value for another 100 years. So we talked a lot about, I thought that they would all say, well, the market determines our success. So I made sure to mention that, and some of the recent successes we've had, buying before things went up a great deal in price. I also said press. A few of our recent acquisitions have received great press. But they really surprised me by saying, well, what about audience engagement? What about the generation of other donations? So it was a really great moment, I felt like, when the committee was all coming together and thinking about the future of this collection and how we're going to really judge that going forward. I did also, I struggled with the idea of presenting a list of artists to them, because my fear was always that, it's going to become a checklist, right? If I have a list of 50 artists, they're going to say, well, why are you collecting this artist when they're not on your checklist? When most of you know that, sometimes it's right to buy an artist and sometimes it's not. Sometimes you have to wait years. But I presented a very carefully worded tactical acquisitions list that I said was a roadmap and not a checklist. But it did seem to really work, because it gave them an idea of not these only big thematic ideas, but really concrete ideas of artists that I'm thinking of and hope to, within the next 5 years, really be pursuing. And I'm really excited where things are right now. I feel like we're in a really good place with the contemporary plan. The last few meetings have been very successful. And it's amazing, because once it's done, and it's so much work, I will warn you, but once it's done, that's your framework and that's your backbone. It's certainly helpful when you have to say no, unfortunately. But it's really helpful anytime I'm presenting a piece and I can just go in and say, well, it actually fits with these 3 goals and these strategies and these collecting areas, so we'd be crazy not to get it. So yeah, I think that sort of takes you through a quick tour of my last year with this process. Yeah.
Yeah, I think even for myself as a junior curator and as a fellow, it's really great to kind of see the workings, and just see how it actually does come together, right? Because that's a major conversation right now in the field, particularly in institutions that have these really substantial historic collections, right? It's like, how do we display it, or how do we grow it, or what do we do? What are new innovative ways to exhibit, install, hang historical work, what is the conversation? And I think that's something that you and Anna do so well in your exhibitions, in the way in which you install the galleries, but then also in how the collection plans and the collections committee meetings go together. So what I was thinking now, for maybe just a couple, maybe 10 minutes, we could just talk casually about, some of these specific examples and ironing out how the 2 of you and Bob came up with these priorities, or came up with, or maybe say what was 1 or 2, priorities or sort of critical areas, that span or stretched across, all three of our areas here that you guys really wanted to focus on?
Jodi, I want to take off on something you said about the strategic plan. Is that okay?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so I was reviewing our collecting plan, and I had the opportunity to be the curatorial representative to our last strategic plan, which I think we put together maybe about 3 years ago, so just before Jodi got here. And that was amazing to sit in on developing a strategic plan. You think a collecting plan is hard. Get the whole institution together to talk about what our strategic priorities should be, and then narrow it down to a document that actually says something is unbelievably difficult. So I learned a lot through that process. But one of the closing lines of our collecting plan is that this, and I'm just going to read this one sentence to you. It says, "This integrated plan reflects the core values of PATHA's current strategic plan: tradition, stewardship, diversity, and a commitment to train artists and provide meaningful professional experiences for artists and their audiences to share." And I think that has been a very useful framework for the three of us as we've thought about our collecting priorities and how to reflect our collecting plan. Tradition, stewardship, and diversity. And I remember I fought really hard to get stewardship in there because I was one of the few real objects people thinking about our building as an object, our collection as an object, taking care of the things we already had. And that can be spread across the whole institution. And then tradition is very important to PATHA, both in teaching and in collecting, and seeing these through lines. And diversity as well is something that has been important to PATHA. In our first annual exhibition in 1811, we had women artists exhibiting with male artists in a time where that was virtually unheard of. And so all of us used those principles that we adapted from the institution's strategic plan to make, I think, a strong collecting plan that we felt could best reflect the institution and also guide us to strengthen our collection.
Jodi, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that before?
No, I think that's, one of the things, I'm happy to give you some examples of my collecting areas too, because I think that gives you an idea of the threads that go through the collection. And one of them is that I define it as socially engaged subject matter relevant to significant issues of our time, which we're very lucky. We had an exhibition this summer from the permanent collection of political work. And it's something that we would be silly not to continue to collect when we have such a strong base of that at PATHA. So that's an example. We also talked about new approaches to abstraction, which we've talked about tracing all the way back to tonalism, right, Anna? Is that sort of how we think about it? Through American Impressionism into abstraction, despite the fact that one of the major gaps in PATHA's collection is abstract expressionism. Unfortunately, we were not collecting that at that time, and that's a difficult one to catch up with. But thinking about where we can take that line through into the contemporary world. So those are just a few examples. Those are two examples of my 4 sort of threads that we were looking at.
Okay, my next question is, how long should curators in particular spend on developing a collecting plan? Like, how long should you take in, in weighing, right, your options or deciding your priorities before you go to your committee?
I took a lot of time this summer. There were a few I mean, it had been happening since probably March of last year. And luckily, I'd have the benefit of being here over a year at that point, right? Yeah. So, you know, there's some of that you're absorbing and you're thinking about on a daily basis. But I really tried to shut down for a few weeks and think only about the collecting plan. It's completely ridiculous, but I was going through my materials today, and, you know, I have these Word documents of artists that I put keywords in, and I think about, you know, and when I went to look at them for the collecting plan, I think I had like 17 pages of artists that I'm interested in, right? That somehow fit within PAFA's collection. And so I did a crazy process of going from that list to my 4 themes, where I had 50 artists in each of the 4 themes, and I kept narrowing it down and narrowing it down. And I have kept all the lists in order so that I can always go back and trace it. But I spent a lot of time. And the other part of it is that at least our committee is with it. You know, they nothing gets past them, which is excellent. I mean, acquisitions get past them. I should clarify that. But they ask the tough questions, and so I knew that if I didn't take the right time to do this, you know, it was not going to be successful. So I would say, I spent a solid 3 weeks on it this summer. Yeah.
Anna, I pose the same questions to you, but I want to spin it a little bit. Like, how long were you here before you had to start thinking about that? Like, were you able to just kind of come in and say, this is a, you know, sort of fabulous, you know, historic collection, so I have time, you know, or was it something that you had to do right off the bat when you got here?
No, I was lucky. I had a little time, which I think is really important, especially with a collection this size. I think anybody who wants you to come in and change a collection right away without really getting to know it, I don't think that's a good idea. Maybe that's my sort of conservative way of looking at things. But even in my interview process at PAFA, I was asked, what do you think of the installation and how are you going to change it? And I remember the installation was new, and I was like, well, why would I want to change it? And they're like, that's your job. You get to change it. And for me, somebody who revered history and structure, and that was a hard idea to deal with. So, but I started changing galleries probably within 3 months that I came. But luckily, I was given a little bit more time to think about my collecting priorities, because when I came in, the director had hired sort of an outside consultant to possibly deaccession certain items from the collection. And so they had looked very closely at the collection, and they knew what the weaknesses were or what they thought the strengths were. And then our contemporary curator and our modern curator were presenting their plans. So I had time to watch them too. So I didn't really have to start thinking about it for a year or two. I also had a major exhibition that I curated in the first 3 years that I was here. At that time, the biggest exhibition that PAFA had done in probably 20 years. So I was sort of left alone to curate that show because that was what needed to happen. But in so doing, I met all the other curators of American art in the country, and I also met most of the dealers and got to know all the dealers. And so that helped me see what was out there, what some prices were, and really think about. I also got to visit all of the best collections of American art in the country and see their collections and think, gosh, why don't we have one of those? You know, why are we missing that? So that was a great experience for me because I got to know everybody without going out there like I was shopping. And then when our endowment funds increased, I had relationships established with dealers and collectors, and I was more comfortable with the collection and was at a time when I could say, okay, I know these are the strengths of our collection, these are the weaknesses, and I'm ready to start shopping.
Yeah, that's exciting to actually be able to go and build the relationships, right?
Oh, yeah.
You actually have to go like into, really building the collection. So you kind of know, automatically like who, like who to go to and who to ask certain questions, right? And who not to. I think that's really, yeah, that's helpful, So we have a little over 15 minutes, but I know there's a delay in when the questions come in. So I'm going to open it up for questions for our attendees and ask for questions to come through the chat window. Maybe something I was thinking about is some of our mentees are from much larger institutions than PAFA. And so when we talk about this whole committee situation, for just, being kind of coy, about, because the committees can sometimes be difficult. So as I'm waiting for questions to come in from our attendees, are there any tips, that you could give some of our mentees in terms of navigating the personalities that we come across sometimes on these committees?
I've really tried to let them know how they can help me, because they all want to be very helpful, and I've learned not to be afraid to tell them no, that like I don't think something's right for the collection. I've learned that just be completely open with them, and it's much more successful than, I don't know, maneuvering. I feel like it's at a good place at the moment, knock on wood. Yeah.
Kelly, I'm struck by one word you said, which is relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's relationships with dealers or relationships with collectors or funders or other curators, relationships is one of the most important skills you can have as a curator. You are a part-time scholar, but a full-time diplomat, I think, as a curator. And it can be really fun to get to know your collectors, and it can be intimidating as well. But I think I just try to get to know the tastes and expertise of all of our collections committee members. And sometimes people can have really strong personalities, especially collectors. But I try to just look to them for what their particular area of expertise is and use them. If they work in the finance industry, I ask their advice about a purchase as a financial investment. And even though that's not the way I see things, I respect that they have that perspective. And I feel like there's enough different personalities that they all add to it. Luckily, especially now with our new divisions, we work with people who really care about the stuff that we collect. And luckily, I think we've earned their respect. So they respect our opinion, we respect their opinion, and we're a pretty good balance. I also would say, have lunch with the chairman of your group and get them on your side and tell them what your desires are for the collection, and they have their experience too. I also think, for me, I try to think about collecting in a 200-year continuum and think about the other people who did this before me and who will do it after, and think of our board members as advocates in that long project. And then it's less about my ego and what I want or what I like as what the institution needs.
Yeah, I think so. I wanted to tap just a little, because we have some really great questions. So I wanted to tap on what you were saying about diplomacy, which has been really interesting as a fellow. Because before doing this, I was in sales. I was a stylist, and so I find like my retail skills, have worked a lot, or my customer service skills, I should say, work a lot when dealing with committees. And so the question that I really want to start with is one of the mentees asked, I'd love to hear from you all and even some of the other mentees about the different models of collections committees, so the different ways that committees may be structured at other places, and how much power they yield at our institution or at different institutions. So mentees, if you have comments on some of these questions, please feel free to type them in the comment box and I can read them back.
Yeah, I can say just a touch about that, just because I've now worked with sort of two different types of committees, although they're really similar. At another institution that I worked at, it was a committee where each person on the committee paid a certain amount to be on the committee, and that money was our acquisition fund. And so at times that did create a different dynamic, because there was perhaps more of a feeling of ownership over that money because they had given it. Whereas here, we're very fortunate to have an acquisition fund, and this structure it's been one of the things I was thinking about, is that one of the great things has been us being able to work to choose people for our committees. And so you can really work when it's not a committee where you have to pay a certain amount. We have invited other arts professionals from Philly to be on the committee, or other experts at different universities, and that's also been great for the structure of our committees.
There was a mentee comment to that question, or mentee response to that question as well, and I'll read it to everyone. It says, for example, at my previous institution, a university museum, the collections committee was made up of only curators and the director. At my current institution, also a university museum, we have members from our leadership council, but they do not provide significant financial support for collecting, nor do they have fiduciary responsibility. When I can share my previous institution, I can share that experience too. Our collections committees were made up of the board members. And it was interesting because the board, they really just trusted the curator. So there was never a no, on anything. So the collection just kind of grew and grew. To our registrar's frustration, but I always, so the difference between how it operated in my previous institution and how it operates here is night and day. I'll go right in, so we don't lose any more time. I'll go into some of the other questions. There's one that asks, is it possible for the mentees on the webinar to have access to your collection plan, or PAFA's overall collection plan? Can we make that public or share that?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know. I think that would be okay.
I think as long as we check with our president and the chair of our collections committee, who's a board member, I don't think they'll have a problem with it, but I wouldn't want to share it until we made sure with them that they were fine with us sharing it.
Yeah, and to the mentees, we do have, or I have, your contact information, so we can get that cleared. I can definitely send it out, or at least send out an email, letting you know that they're deliberating about it. Another question is directly to you, Jodi. It says it's about assessing engagement. So this mentee asks, can you be more specific about what they meant by that, or how they look at art now?
Right. I think some of it was that's a puzzle, frankly, for me. I've thought of different ways of doing that. I think part of it is visitor comments. I'm putting a piece up that actually we haven't acquired yet, but I'm hoping that we will acquire. And I actually thought about soliciting audience opinions on the piece, letting them know that this piece is going to be up for vote. What do you think about the piece? And the other is anecdotal. Visitor services. Sometimes I'll be able to wander in and talk to. I get my best information from them because they see how people are interacting with the work, if they're even standing in front of it, if they're rolling their eyes, if they're what have you, any of that. The other thing that they talked about that maybe is a little bit about relates to audience engagement, and that I think we all could probably name 5 favorites in the collection that the audience loves to see, that our visitors love to see. And so one of the things that they talked about was, well, maybe it's the number of times that the piece is out in 5 or 10 years. And that could be a way of assessing that. I haven't figured that piece out yet. I'd like to do more with it, you know, and in fact, I've often thought about trying, how could you get audiences, you know, we're starting to go on a 2-year commissioning process actually with an artist. And so how could I get the audience involved in that tomorrow? You know, is there a way to somehow get them interacting with the artist, or, you know, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it's something I think about a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would be open to suggestions.
If you have any suggestions, yeah, type them down so I can read. That's always a hard one, you know, to really tackle. This next question is really near and dear to my heart, because this is something that I've actually been I have avoided for a couple of months. I'm starting to feel more confident in it. But it says I would love to know more about how exactly you begin establishing relationships with dealers. Do you approach booths at art fairs? Do you just spend, you know, regular time in galleries? Are you in touch with the galleries before you're ever even interested in a particular working relationship? So how does one navigate those market relationships?
Shall I go first, Jodi?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. I was lucky when I was hired here, and I don't know if Jodi even knows this. The first year I was hired, my salary was paid by 2 of our trustees who lived in New York. Yeah. They didn't have enough money to hire me, so David got these trustees to pay my salary, and then they're like, well, if we like her, we'll keep her around and we'll find the money to keep her. Yeah. So those 2 trustees basically took me under their wing and introduced me to all of the dealers they liked. So if you can make friends with a collector who has a good relationship with dealers, then that's a great way to meet them, because you are being introduced by somebody they trust and know. I find in the field of historic American art, the dealers, the scholars, the curators, they're all pretty friendly, and it's a pretty small world. We have an American art fair every year, and even if I don't have any money, I always go up. I always go to Christie's and Sotheby's for the American art fairs, and I check in with the specialists, and I tell them I'm there to see the stuff. I go say hi to almost all the dealers. I may not go up to all their galleries, but I just go to support them, and I think that they really appreciate that. So that when they have something, they will know what I'm looking for, and they send it along, and we just develop a personal rapport. And I don't have a ton of money to spend. You know, I can get 1 or 2 objects a year, but they continue to send me things just because I continue to maintain those relationships.
Yeah, I would agree. I think showing up is a big part of it. In the contemporary world, it's also been for me with artists, because that's sort of where I start with things. So, you know, I look at an artist that I'm a fan of, and I start to look at this gallery's roster, and I make sure I go to the gallery and introduce myself. Though I have to be honest, I remember starting in the field and being petrified to go into galleries, because I don't know. I think contemporary galleries are still intimidating, but you know, the more you do it, the more comfortable you will be with it. And it's people like to see you in their space and like to see you at the art fairs, and just continuing those relationships.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I definitely have been petrified. The last, like I said, I think through December and January, I've been very proud of myself because I've been actually going and making phone calls. But one thing that has helped me a lot is going with Anna and going with Jodi. Just a few weeks ago, I went with our president, David Brigham, as well. So if there's other your colleagues, who you're working with every day, and also like Anna said earlier, going with a patron or going with your president or your deputy director, because they have those relationships already to kind of provide the introduction for you. If you're a contemporary curator, if you have, I would say if you have good relationships with your artists, go to different galleries and fairs and events with them, because sometimes gallery owners may be a little friendlier to artists sometimes, because that's happened for me too. There was a comment that I want to not make sure that I don't forget to mention. Someone has posted that AAM has models of collection plans on their website that they found very useful. So you can go to the AAM website to find collection models. And I think something else just came in. Oh, and one last question. So we have like 3 minutes, but I think we can do this. It says, why was it difficult to get your committee to accept that your collections really should be distinct from neighboring institutions? What was their reasoning?
Sorry.
It's just one last one. It says, I'm in a small community and I feel very strongly that we need to be distinct. So what helped you sway or convince them?
Well, I'm not ultimately sure that we convince them. It's something that we sort of just, I think we just do it now. We just have that as our idea. Because it did provoke quite the discussion in at least my small group. And I think it goes back to what Anna was talking about this idea of quality, which is something that at least in the contemporary realm right now, I sort of, things that are, we could talk about connoisseurship and all these things, but in the contemporary realm, there's a lot of different ways that you can go with things. But I think that there is a feeling that I disagree with some people on the committee and some collectors and some obviously not, that there's one version and it's the best version and there's one artist and you need to be collecting that artist. And so that another institution, we're going to have those same ideas of what the best is. And sometimes we will and sometimes we won't. I think having something that's a little bit more, rich or different, hopefully would entice audiences to come and see that.
And I think, from my perspective, some of our board members might feel competitive with other board members in town, and so they might want to see PAFA competing with the PMA's American Art Department, where, as I think as curators, we try to see, okay, well, the PMA has this strength, so we're going to have this strength. It's not to say that we're not competitive, but I don't know that that's the most fruitful way to build a collection. We try to think of the city as an ecosystem and being able to provide an experience at PAFA that they can't have anywhere else. Like, why would you want to have a Bierstadt of Yosemite at the PMA and at PAFA if you could have a Bierstadt at Niagara Falls one place and a Bierstadt of Yosemite at another place? Then you get it all, right? And we like to be collaborative and creative in that way.
Well, thank you both. This was perfect. We are literally at time. I think we provided, and even our mentees, I think this was a very, very fruitful conversation. Even in working with you guys, I learned some things today. I'd like to thank all of my mentees, or not my mentees, but all of the mentees in the program for attending. This will be posted, and available on AAMC's website, so you can always refer back to it. I think our contact information is on in our bios and in our postings. So if you have further questions, feel free to email us. And I know people have busy schedules, so I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Please enjoy your weekend. Thank you so much to you, Anna and Jodi, as well, too. Thank everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.